Good evening.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Thank you. I think last night the volume of my voice was very low. Did you notice it was low?
The volume on your voice or on your computer?
The voice.
Not in particular.
Okay. I was just listening to it this morning on Facebook, and it was very low. For some reason, it turns down the volume sometimes, the Zoom. I don't know why that is. So now I hope it's good. I'll just check to make sure.
It sounds okay to me.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Okay. Morning it was down. Okay. So now we'll do the Facebook. So we're starting a new chapter there. Reish Nun Vav, yeah, Vav, yeah. So what does it say here? Looks like it's a short one. Yeah, not too long. So it says here, I'm sorry, no, not this one. This one. This one is not so short. Okay, whatever, it doesn't matter. So anyway, it says over here, En Tomlin b'Shabbat. Just make sure I'm in the right place. Right, this one, yeah. It actually is short. Okay. The next chapter is on insulation, right? That's the one we were looking for. But this is not the one. So it says here, Shesh tekiyot tokin be'erev Shabbat, right? So in the old days, what they had was like the system where they would blow the shofar 6 times, erev Shabbat, to signal to you, in terms of the time frame, which time period you're in, how close you are to Shabbat. So let's take a look in the Torah, exactly what he says there. So he says they do this on a high area, so everybody should hear it. So they go like on top of the hills, top of the mountain, whatever, and they do it there. So what is the series of these shofar, right? These blasts. So what the first one? תקיעה ראשונה נמנעו אותן שבשדות מלעשות מלאכתן. Right. So the first one signaled that the laborers who were working in the field should cease to labor at that point. They got to stop working. That was the first one. ואין הקרובים רשאים להיכנס עד שיכנסו גם רחוקים. So he says the close ones cannot come in until the distant ones also come in. ויכנסו כולם ביחד, so they come in all together, you know. Interesting. ועדיין חנויות פתוחות. So he says at this point, the stores are still open, right? והתריסים מונחים התחילו לתקוע תקיעה שנייה. So now they do a second blast of the shofar. So what is that signal? התריסים ננעלו, חנויות, right? עדיין, right? נסתלקו התריסים ננעלו חנויות. So what does that mean? Now they close down the stores. You got to shut it down. ועדיין החמין והקדרות רותחין על גבי הקירה. So he says, but they're still cooking in the house, right? They haven't finished cooking yet. התחילו תקיעה שלישית. Once they do the third one, right? Blast. סילק המסלק והטמין המטמין. So now, right, they have to get everything prepared, meaning that they have to put everything in the final position in the stove, right? In its final position. Going into Shabbat. Then they would light the candles. Right? So once they got their stove, right, and everything in place, all the dishes, the pots, everything, next move is they light the candles. So now, right, we give you like a little bit more time to, like, you know, make a small fish or to make, you know, a loaf of bread in the oven. So at that point, right, after that, so that how long does that go, right? Apparently about 20 minutes, let's say. So once that 20 minutes is up, right, they do the last shofar, which signifies, right, that you gotta go into Shabbat, right? Shabbat mode. It's like sunset, basically. Today, by the way, in Israel, you know, they do something similar to this, but not like this. What they do is they just like do one big, right? It's not a shofar; it's more like an alarm, right? It's a bomb shelter alarm, but everybody knows it's for Shabbat. You know, so what are they telling you? Stop doing labor. You know, at that point when they blow that. So they don't do it this way, right? It's not so elaborate like it's described over here. But they have something, you know, which is supposed to remind you to go into Shabbat, basically. Okay. They have this, in the religious neighborhoods. I don't think they have it in the secular neighborhoods. This whole thing. Okay, whatever. So then he says, okay, I guess it's later on. I'll wait for that. I'll go to Bet Yosef. So it says Bet Yosef, right? Where's the source for this? It's a Braita Besopek Bamed Vamidlikin, right? In Shabbat, Lamed He Amud Bet. Ve'en hakrovin rasha'im likanes ad sheikansuu rachokim, right? So what is this business, right? That it tells you that they cannot go in, the closer ones until the further one comes, the ones come. Why is that? Why do we wait for everybody to come in together? Rashi explains, this is that shouldn't lead to suspicion, right? That they did labor longer than they were allowed. That's why they come in all together. After they heard the voice of the shofar, because not everybody recognizes who's far, who's close, right? Not everybody knows that. And that what he said, right? That they used to blow the shofar in a high place, right? Elevated area. From the Rambam, he says, Pesok Perkei. Katav Ramagid, Dahachi Mashma B'Gemara. So it says Ramagid, the Gemara also implies that like that. Okay, great. So we have one more piece here in the tour. So I'll just go back there. And it says, Kata Rambam. It says the Rambam like this. Tekiya Rishona Tokiya B'Mincha. So look what he says, the Rambam. He says, right, the first shofar that they do is Mincha time. Shlishit, but the third one is going to be close to sunset. That's what he says. So what time is Mincha time? This is what we call Plaga Mincha, right? Which is or Mincha Gdola, right? Which is about 3 hours before the night. So that's the spread that they have there, right? Okay, that's the Rambam. So the chapter is done. Let's go to Bet Yosef. Gamkin the Perek, right? So it says the Bet Yosef. This is also in the Rambam, 5th parak. Laws of Shabbat. That's it. Very simple. Okay, so now we go to Shulchan Aruch. Got to bring it up. Reish Nun Vav. So says Shulchan Aruch, Kishayu Yisrael B'Yishuvan. So he says when the Jews were Israel, right, was in their settlement. What does that mean? They were in Israel. Hayu Tokin Be'erev Shabbat Shesh Tekiyot. So what they did was, as we said, right, on Erev Shabbat, they did 6 blowings of the shofar. In order to separate the people from the labor. Right, gradually, right, as we said. So says the Ramah, he says now the custom is also, in the in the religious areas. When they do, right, close to Shabbat, like half hour or shah or 1 hour, Shemachriz shliach tzibur. So the shliach tzibur, right, which is a chazan, he announces leachin atzmam Shabbat to announce for Shabbat, to prepare themselves for Shabbat. So this is what they're doing in Israel, basically, right? Except that now they're using the bomb shelter siren. Okay. This is the So this is like instead of those shofars they used to do. So he says, right, it's proper to do this in every place, the Ramah. So I guess that's where they got this whole idea to do it in Israel from this Ramah. Okay, there you go. So that's the end of the chapter, a very short chapter. Now we're going to insulation, finally, right? In America, honestly, I don't see anybody who does insulation, but in Israel, a lot of people do it. It's very widespread over there.
And this is with like the towels and whatnot.
Yeah, they use these what do you call it? These rags, what I tell you, right? That not every plata is created equal. There are some very weak ones. There are very strong ones also. I happen to have right now a very strong one. Which does a great job. It really cooks, and heats very well. But right, some of them are not so strong. So especially cheaper ones. So insulation really helps with them because they're not really very strong at all. Okay, so let's go to next chapter. Insulation. So I'm just going to get a glass of water. I'll be right with you. One second. Okay. So it says here, "En tomnim b'Shabbat afilu b'davar she'enu mosif haval." So on Shabbat, you're not allowed to insulate, right? Even something which doesn't add heat. Aval, safek chashecha, safek ena chashecha. But if it's a doubt, right, whether it's Shabbat, in other words, it's like twilight. So then we can insulate, right, at that time. So meaning what? That you could do it like even after sunset, right? 13 and a half minutes, whatever. Because that's like doubtful at that time, you know? So you would be able to insulate at that time. And the reason is because insulation is rabbinical, you know? So when in cases of doubt, we go lenient. This is the reason why. Okay. So then he goes on. ובערב שבת מותר להטמין בדבר שאינו מוסיף הבב. So he says, but Erev Shabbat, right, before Shabbat, you're allowed to insulate in something which doesn't add heat. אבל לא בדבר שמוסיף הבב, but not something which adds heat. Okay? So he says, right, באלו דברים שמוסיפים הבב. These are things which add heat. פסולת של זיתים, right? One is the olive pits, the shel shumshumin, right? And also the pits from the sesame. Sesame seeds. Right, but the truth is, you know, there it's not the seeds, it's the shells, right? The shells is what they use. Whatever, something like that. I don't know. Yeah, whatever. They use sesame, whatever it is. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but anyway, the zevel umelach the seed. Then we have manure, salt, and lime, vechol, and sand. Ben lachim ben ibishim, whether it's moist or dry sand. So all these substances, they do increase the heat. So how is that, right? Because they insulate very well, you know, so they add heat to it. Then he brings the hay and grape seeds and felt and grass, lachim, moist grass. Aval ivashim tomnim, but he says the dry grass you can insulate with that. It doesn't add heat. But tomnim the kasut. Also, it says you can use the clothing, right? They used to use like worn out clothing, you know, rags. Perot, right, or fruits. Oh, bekanfei yonah, right, or the feathers of pigeon's feathers. Ubeneoret shel pishtan. Also the flax. Oh, benesoret shel harashim. Also the sawdust, right, something like that. So these things you're allowed to use. They don't add heat. So as we said, right, today we don't use these substances. You know, what we do is we just cover it with rags. That's what we do today. So that's it, right? So we'll go to Bet Yosef. So it says Bet Yosef, Besor Perek Lamem Madlikin, right? Where is this source? Lamed Dal Amud Aleph in Shabbat. Tanan, Safek Chashecha, Safek Ena Chashecha, right? If there's a doubt whether it's Shabbat, right, twilight, and Maasin Vadai. So at that point, we don't take Maaser from something which is for sure not untied. Aval Maasin Demai. But we do take Maaser from something which is a doubt. So there you're right. It says over here, you're allowed to insulate at that time. Tomnin Tachamin. The Gemara Amar, so it says the Gemara, so ask a question, right? Which is, why don't we insulate in something which adds heat? When it's already Shabbat. Because we're afraid he may come to boil it, to boil a dish. One leads to the other. So Abaye says, right, that if that's the case, then we should also decree during twilight. So he says, but usually, right, the pot's already hot, they're already boiling. So Rava says, why do they say we don't insulate in something which adds heat? Even before Shabbat. We're concerned that he's going to insulate, right, in embers. And there's going to be there's coals in there, right, which are still glowing, burning. So Abaye tells him, why you should do it? Why do I care if he does that? What does it bother me? So he says, right, since it's before Shabbat, what's the problem? So we're concerned he's going to come to stir the coals, right? That's the bottom line. One thing leads to the other, right? Okay. So then it says, Pirish Rashi explains, Gezerah Shema Yartiach, right? As we said, it's a decree that he may come to boil the water. Shema Imtza Kederato Shenittanena. Maybe he'll find, right, that his pot got cooled down. And Kishirtse Liatmina, and if he wants to insulate it, and because it's cooled down, he's gonna boil it. Techila first, before he insulates it. So it turns out he's cooking on Shabbat. So he says, Rotchot hen, they're boiling. Shesamuch leben hashmashot, because close to Shabbat, right? He moves them moves them off the fire. So we're not concerned that it's going to cool down. He's going to have to boil it. And we're concerned he's going to stir the coals. When it gets dark, when it comes to cook the dish, he wasn't totally cooked yet. So they decreed that even something which is fully cooked, until he breaks out the coals, or shake tom, right, or he covers them. Zoti girsat Rashi. That's according to Rashi. Perusho ba. But the Rif, he says, Aval Arif, Gores mi mipnei ma amru. His text says like this. Why did they say En tamnim bedavar mosif havar? That we don't insulate something which adds heat. Even if it's still before Shabbat. Because we're afraid he's going to boil it. Abaye tells him, So Abaye says if that's the case, then we should also be concerned during twilight. So he says, you know why? Because at that time, during twilight, usually the pots are already hot as it is. So why they say we're not allowed to insulate something which doesn't add heat? Once during Shabbat, because we're afraid he's going to come to insulate it and in the embers, right? And Pirush Ran says there, והרמב"ם בפירוש משנה בממד תמרים. So he says the Rambam says שמא ירתיח, he may come to boil it. כלומר אם נתיר לטמון בדבר המוסיף אבל. So if we're going to allow him, right, to insulate in something which adds heat, before Shabbat, שמא תרתח הקדרה בשבת, maybe the dish will boil on Shabbat. He's going to have to open it up, to cool it down a little bit. Until the boiling, right, subsides. So then he's going to have to come and cover it on Shabbat. So then he's insulating with something which adds heat on Shabbat. Shehu asur, forbidden. So they asked over there, then we should also forbid to do it during the twilight. Right? They should decree that not to decree they shouldn't insulate in something which adds heat. For tomorrow. And then he answered, so it says usually, right at that time, twilight, they're boiling, They already boiled, and they settle down. And once they settle down from the boiling, they don't boil again. But Rambam says, okay. כתב שם רמגיד, so says רמגיד, שכל האחרונים השיבו עליו, so it says all the later authorities, right, they didn't agree with the Rambam there. שאין דבר הזה מתקבל שמבעוד יום אסור, so it said, they said it doesn't make sense, right, that before Shabbat it's going to be forbidden, it's going to be permitted and during twilight, right, which is later on. בעוד שהוא מפרש רותחות שכבר נחו מרתיחתן. And also because he explains that when it says that they're boiling, they already settled down from their boiling. So he says, therefore the Rabbi explains, he explains it differently. The Rabbi doesn't read the Rambam. So he says it's forced to what he says. So he says that therefore the main text over here is the Rashi's text. That's what it says in Ran. Okay. The Arosh, also the Rosh. Okay. So says the Ran over here, Gabe Masid Anshe Tveria, regarding the story, right, with the people from Tveria. The Mehatam Shamina, we learn from that story the Hamatmin Bedavar Hamosif Haval. The person who insulates in something which adds heat, atavshil asur, right? That dish is going to be forbidden to eat. Even b'diabad. B'katav Ramban, says the Ramban, dafka betzonen shenitchamem or shenitamek b'apelo. That's only if it's something which is cold, right, and it got hot, or something which is congealed and getting damaged. But if it's something which stays in his heat, the Shat Rishonah in the first place, and then we don't have that. Okay, that's the end of this bit, Yosef. There's more somewhere else. Yeah, there is somewhere. Let's see what we got. So a small piece over here. It says Katav od be'agod Mordechai Sham. It says there that behechad de bashil kol tzorko, if it's fully cooked, the dish. Afal gab de asul yatmin v'dabar mosif havav. Even though never, regardless, right? You're not allowed to insulate in something which adds heat. Kol makom im shachach, right? But it says nevertheless, if he forgot, shogeg, right, inadvertently, beitmin ben mosif havav. So he put it in something which adds heat. It's allowed to eat, right? So in other words, he's telling you here, the Mordechai, that if you did it inadvertently, it's allowed to eat it. But if you did it on purpose, we don't allow it. So let me say that again, right? Make sure I said it right. One more time. So it says like this, right? If he cooks it, it's fully cooked. So now, right, we say you're not allowed to put to insulate it in something which adds heat. Nevertheless, right, if he did it inadvertently and he transgressed, he is allowed to eat it. That's what he's saying. That's it. Okay. Let's go to Shulchan Aruch. Say Shulchan Aruch like this. And tomnin b'Shabbat, right? We don't insulate on Shabbat. Afilu b'davar she'en mosif habal, right? So even things which don't add heat on Shabbat doesn't matter, regardless. But if it's twilight, right? Doubtfully Shabbat. Tomnin, then we can insulate with something which doesn't add heat. But it says when something which adds heat, right, that we cannot use at all, even before Shabbat. If he did so, right? If he did so, it's forbidden, right? This dish. So I'm assuming when he says is that it's forbidden, that after Shabbat it should be okay, right? To eat it. Doesn't say that, but that's what we said in the former cases, right? So I'm assuming the same thing applies here as well. Just see what it says here in the commentaries, just to make sure we're on the right track here. Okay, I don't see that they're mentioning this here, but let's go on a little bit. We'll see what happens here. So anyway, as we said, right, it's forbidden. But Afka Betzonin, that's only says that's only if it's cold. Shenitchamim or shenitzamek ve'afelo. That it got hot, heated, or it's congealing and bad and good for it. But if it's just standing right at the same heat, just shah rishona mutar, it stays the same way as it was, then it's allowed. Okay, so says the Rama here, Yesh omrim that im shachach v'itmin b'shogeg. Some say that if he forgot and he insulated in something inadvertently, which adds heat, sharelechol, right? You're allowed to eat that. Right. So, that shows you that we're not that strict with it. Some say this only applies if he's doing it for the night. If he's doing it for tomorrow, you're allowed to put something there which adds heat, right? We don't paskin like this, but there is an opinion like this. Okay, that's that. Now, so, but the Rama says here, right? The diavad, you can rely on this. So, meaning what? If you did it, you could eat it, but don't be accustomed to do what he says. Okay, sounds good. Makes sense. So I'll read this one more time. A little bit confusing. Make sure we got everything right. So it says like this: "And tomnin b'Shabbat afilu b'davar shen mosif haval." On Shabbat, you're not allowed to insulate even with something which doesn't add heat. So we already listed all the things which add heat or don't add heat, right? In the tour, we went through that. So he doesn't repeat this over here. Maybe in the next halakha he will talk about it. But anyway, we don't use those substances nowadays, as we said, right? It's not really used at all. Nobody insulates in sand, things like this, right? That's a relic, right, from the old days. But anyway, if you do, right, this is the rule. So either way, that's the way it is. So okay, fine. So but that's only if it's Shabbat. But if it's doubtfully Shabbat, as we said, right, twilight time, so then you're allowed to insulate something which doesn't add heat. But something which does add heat, we can't even use that before Shabbat. So he says, right, that if you did that, the dish is forbidden, as we said, right? You're not allowed to have it. So apparently, right, that means until the Shabbat goes out, right? That's the proper answer because we're not going to tell you to throw in the garbage, right? This food. There's no reason to be so strict, right? Why? Why do I tell you that? Because it's only rabbinical, this whole thing, insulation, whatever. So not really something we should throw out the food for. We're not going to go that far. Okay, so that's great. Now, the dafka betzonen, right? That's only something was cold, right, and it's getting heated up by the insulation, right, or it's getting congealing and good for it. But something which is staying at the same heat, right? Or just like it was originally, that's mutar, that's allowed. It's not adding heat. It's just maintaining the heat. That's something else. Okay, that's the Shulchan Aruch. Now the Ramah. So, yesh omrim, deim shachach v'itmin b'shogeg, right? B'davar o mosif haval. Now it brings another opinion, right? Which is from the Mordechai. If you forgot, right, inadvertently, and insulated in something which adds heat, you're allowed to eat that, right? B'diavad. So that's one thing. Shulchan Aruch doesn't paskin that way. Some say this only applies when you're doing it for the night. But if you're doing it for tomorrow, you're allowed to use something which adds heat. So he says, "B'diavad, we can rely on that, right? If you did it, don't be accustomed to do so." So Ramah is right to just recap the whole the Ramah here. Ramah is telling you that if you're doing it for the morning, so meaning what? You have your cholent, right, which is going to be eaten in the morning. So what you do is, according to this opinion, you're allowed to insulate in something which adds heat before Shabbat. So he says, right, b'diavad, we can rely on this. So what does b'diavad mean? That if you did it, right, you really shouldn't have done it, but if you did it, you're allowed to eat it. That's what it means.
You're allowed to eat it right then or after Shabbat?
Right then, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, right. You can have it for your morning meal. Okay, fantastic. So I guess we'll stop here. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak u'baruch, le'ela tov. We'll see you tomorrow. B'ezrat Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.